The gavel crashes down in courtroom 3B, cutting through the tense silence. A photograph flashes on the evidence screen. Black mold crawling up apartment walls, chunks of ceiling scattered across a child's bedroom floor. James Davidson's smug expression crumbles as Judge Judy holds up a document, her steely gaze locked on the landlord. The paper trembles in her hand. 16 families. 16 lives destroyed. The courtroom erupts in gasps as the truth about Davidson Properties begins to unravel. Adina Martinez stared at her phone screen, refreshing her email for the 10th time that morning. Another rejection from another apartment complex. The crushing weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders as she glanced at the twin beds where her daughters, Anna and Sophia, still slept peacefully. 3 weeks remained until they needed to leave their current apartment. The building was being converted into luxury condos, and their lease wouldn't be renewed. The 32-year-old medical receptionist had spent every spare moment of the past 2 months searching for a new home in their school district. Each application came with another non-refundable fee, slowly draining the savings she'd carefully built over 5 years. The rental market in Springfield had become a battlefield, with dozens of applicants competing for each available unit. That's when Davidson Properties appeared in her search results. The 2-bedroom apartment on Oak Street seemed too good to be true. The rent was $400 below market rate, utilities included. The property's website showcased freshly painted walls, updated appliances, and a small playground visible from what would be the girl's bedroom window. Adina's heart raced as she dialed the number. James Davidson answered on the second ring. His voice carried the warmth and authority of a seasoned professional. He explained the reduced rent as part of a community support initiative, giving priority to single parents and essential workers. Adina qualified as both. When she mentioned her concerns about the approval process, Davidson waved them away. No application fee needed. He could meet her that afternoon. The apartment wasn't quite as polished as the website photos suggested. The paint looked a bit uneven, and a few of the kitchen cabinet handles were loose. But Davidson had an answer for everything. The maintenance team would address any issues before move-in. The security deposit was higher than normal, but that included a professional cleaning service and a full repaint. Sophia and Anna ran excited circles around the empty rooms, already planning where their toys would go. Adina's instincts whispered caution, but desperation spoke louder. The lease term seemed standard, though the print was tiny and Davidson rushed through the signing process. He emphasized the time-sensitive nature of the offer. Other applicants were waiting. Adina's hand trembled slightly as she wrote the check for the deposit and first month's rent, nearly emptying her savings account. That night, as she tucked her daughters into bed, Adina felt a mix of relief and unease. Anna asked when they could start packing their unicorn collection. Sophia wondered if the playground had a swing set. Their excitement should have been contagious, but something about Davidson's 2 perfect answers and rushed paperwork nagged at her thoughts. Still, they had a home. In Springfield's brutal housing market, that had to count for something. She couldn't have known then that the seemingly generous offer from Davidson Properties would drag her into a nightmare that would affect dozens of families across the city. Or that her search for simple justice would lead her into Judge Judy's courtroom, where the true cost of James Davidson's community support initiative would finally come to light. The first signs of trouble appeared 3 days after they moved in. 3 days after moving in, Adina woke to Sophia's scream from the bathroom. The shower water had turned ice-cold mid-rinse, leaving her 9-year-old daughter shivering and soap-covered. Adina's calls to maintenance went straight to voicemail. Her messages to Davidson bounced back undelivered. After 3 days of cold showers, she started keeping a detailed log of every issue. The water heater marked only the beginning. Brown water stains spread across the bathroom ceiling whenever it rained. A sharp, musty smell wafted from the girls' closet. The playground equipment, she noticed, had a tattered condemnation notice dated 6 months earlier. Each discovery chipped away at Davidson's polished promises. His responses turned aggressive when she finally reached him. He blamed the water heater problems on tenant misuse, and claimed the ceiling spots existed before she moved in. When Adina mentioned the condemned playground he'd advertised as newly renovated, Davidson accused her of trying to manufacture reasons to break her lease. Each interaction left her feeling smaller, more trapped. The first monthly bill shattered any remaining illusions. Despite Davidson's promise of included utilities, an envelope arrived demanding $380 for common area maintenance fees and infrastructure support costs. The lease's microscopic print, she now saw, permitted additional necessary charges at management's discretion. Davidson dismissed her questions with curt references to the contract she'd signed. New charges materialized the second month. Security monitoring fees appeared, though the building's cameras hung lifeless on the walls. Pest control services showed up on the bill, yet no exterminator had ever visited. Each time Adina challenged a charge, Davidson quoted different clauses buried in the lease's labyrinthine language. Her savings account dwindled as she struggled to keep pace with the mounting costs. A chance encounter at the mailboxes changed everything. Elena Rodriguez from apartment 3C shared an identical story. The same promises, the same spiraling fees, the same maintenance issues ignored. Together, they began talking to other tenants. A sinister pattern emerged. Davidson specifically targeted vulnerable families. Single parents desperate for stability, elderly residents on fixed incomes, recent immigrants uncertain about their rights. All drawn in by below-market rent promises that evaporated under avalanches of hidden fees. The evidence mounted. Mrs. Fleming from 2A revealed photos of black mold creeping behind her grandson's bed. Tom Watson in 4D had paid 6 months of emergency repair fees for a heater that remained broken. The Patel family in 1B faced a doubled security deposit, justified by market adjustments, buried in paragraph 14 of their lease. Adina created a tenant group chat. 16 families joined, sharing similar stories of exploitation. They compared bills, documented every interaction, photographed every maintenance issue. When Davidson discovered their communication network, the retaliation began. Fabricated noise complaints appeared in Adina's file, citing incidents when her daughters were at school. Elena received warnings about unauthorized occupants, her teenage son who'd lived there since day one. Mrs. Fleming found a notice demanding emergency fumigation, requiring immediate evacuation with no warning or justification. Davidson crossed a final line when he moved to evict the Patel family for requesting repairs to exposed electrical wiring in their children's bedroom. The eviction notice cited interference with property management and violation of communication protocols. That same afternoon, Adina spotted Davidson showing her unit to prospective tenants, though her lease had 5 months remaining. Her hands trembled as she photographed his new rental listing. The advertised rent jumped $200 higher than current rates, now promising all utilities and fees included. The photos showed renovated units that didn't exist. The condemned playground appeared pristine. The same deceptive images that had once fooled her. Late that night, Adina spread their collected evidence across her kitchen table. Maintenance requests disappeared into void mailboxes. Bills bloated with invented charges. Contradictory lease clauses. Safety hazards documented in every unit. 16 families, systematically exploited by a man who turned their desperation into profit. Davidson wasn't just negligent. He operated a calculated scheme to extract every possible dollar while maintaining a veneer of legitimacy. The next morning, Adina Martinez walked into Springfield Legal Aid clutching a manila folder bursting with evidence. She didn't know it yet, but she'd taken the first step toward Judge Judy's courtroom, and toward exposing Davidson's operation to the world. Attorney Maria Ramirez studied the stack of documents spread across her desk at Springfield Legal Aid. 20 years of tenant advocacy hadn't prepared her for the scope of Davidson's operation. Adina Martinez sat across from her, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as Maria examined another set of doctored maintenance records. He backdated everything, Adina explained, pointing to a receipt. This claims they fixed our water heater in March. We didn't even move in until April. Maria nodded, adding the document to an ever-growing pile of evidence. The attorney had canceled her other appointments that morning. Adina's case demanded immediate attention. The investigation expanded beyond Oak Street apartments. Davidson Properties owned 6 buildings across Springfield, each operating under slightly different names. Maria's paralegal discovered shell companies, all leading back to James Davidson. A pattern emerged. Buy struggling properties, promise renovations, attract desperate tenants, then bleed them dry with fabricated fees and non-existent services. Adina's tenant group became command central for the investigation. Mrs. Fleming's grandson, a college student studying accounting, analyzed 2 years of billing records. He uncovered over $157,000 in fraudulent charges across all Davidson's properties. Elena Rodriguez, who worked as a nurse, documented health code violations that filled 3 binders. The Patel's teenage daughter photographed every safety hazard, carefully logging dates and locations. Maria brought in building inspectors. Their reports read like horror stories. Faulty wiring masked by fresh paint. Load-bearing walls weakened by unreported water damage. Carbon monoxide detectors disconnected to save on replacement costs. Each inspection revealed new layers of negligence hidden beneath cosmetic repairs. Davidson's retaliation intensified. Mysterious plumbing emergencies flooded apartments of tenants who spoke to inspectors. Late fees appeared on accounts with documented on-time payments. Security deposits vanished into administrative processing. But now, instead of suffering alone, tenants had Maria's office backing them up. Each act of retaliation strengthened their case. The breakthrough came from Tom Watson's grandson, a tech-savvy high school student who discovered Davidson's old social media posts. Photos showed him boasting about maximum profit strategies at real estate seminars. His presentation slides, partially visible in the images, outlined methods for optimizing tenant turnover and fee structure manipulation. The evidence painted a picture of calculated exploitation, not mere negligence. Maria worked late into the night preparing court documents. This case needed more than local housing court. Davidson's operation crossed into criminal territory: mail fraud, wire fraud, falsifying business records. But local prosecutors, overwhelmed with violent crime cases, placed white-collar investigations at the bottom of their priority list. Then Adina remembered something. Last Christmas, her brother had mentioned a TV show that specialized in landlord-tenant disputes. She pulled up the submission form for Judge Judy's producers. Maria initially hesitated. Television justice seemed risky. But as they reviewed the show's history, they found a pattern. Judge Judy had a record of exposing rental scams. Her rulings, while legally binding, also brought public attention to tenant rights issues. The production team called within hours of receiving their submission. Adina's detailed records impressed them. The scope of Davidson's scheme, affecting multiple families across several properties, fit their criteria for compelling cases. But most importantly, they recognized the broader impact potential. This wasn't just about Adina's family. It was about exposing tactics that landlords used nationwide. Maria helped Adina prepare for television court. They organized evidence into clear, presentable segments. Other tenants provided sworn affidavits. Building inspectors agreed to testify. The Patels shared security camera footage of Davidson giving unauthorized tours of occupied apartments. Mrs. Fleming's grandson created spreadsheets tracking every fraudulent fee. Legal aid helped other affected tenants file separate cases in local courts. If Davidson tried to dismiss the TV court appearance as entertainment, he'd face multiple simultaneous lawsuits. His choice became clear: face Judge Judy's courtroom or battle 16 separate cases across different jurisdictions. The night before filming, Adina sat with her daughters explaining what would happen. Sophia worried about seeing the mean man again. Anna asked if this meant they'd have to move. Adina assured them they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. This case could help other families avoid similar traps. Her girls hugged her tight, their trust giving her strength for the battle ahead. As Adina packed her evidence for the trip to Los Angeles, her phone buzzed with supportive messages from other tenants. Elena sent a photo of her son giving a thumbs up. Mrs. Fleming shared a Chinese proverb about justice prevailing. The Patels offered a prayer for strength. What started as one mother's fight for decent housing had grown into a community's stand against exploitation. Tomorrow, in Judge Judy's courtroom, James Davidson would finally face the consequences of his actions. Adina touched the manila folder containing their evidence, now thick with the stories of 16 families. Soon, the world would know the truth about Davidson Properties. And perhaps, just perhaps, other landlords would think twice before targeting vulnerable tenants. The television studio courtroom hummed with tension as Adina Martinez took her place behind the plaintiff's podium. Across the aisle, James Davidson adjusted his Italian silk tie, offering practiced smiles to the bailiff. His confidence filled the room, the same self-assured manner that had convinced 16 families to trust him with their homes and savings. Judge Judy Sheindlin entered, her presence immediately commanding attention. She studied the foot-thick case file, her reading glasses perched at the edge of her nose. The familiar "all rise" from Petrie Hawkinsbird, her bailiff, echoed through the studio. As the gallery settled, Judge Judy fixed Davidson with a penetrating stare that had unraveled countless scammers before him. Ms. Martinez, Judge Judy began, her tone measured but sharp. You're suing Davidson Properties and Mr. James Davidson for $5,000 for fraudulent lease terms, illegal fees, and maintenance negligence. You're also requesting an immediate lease termination without penalty. Correct. Adina's voice stayed steady as she responded affirmatively. She'd practiced with Maria, knowing these opening moments would set the tone. Davidson's smile widened slightly. $5,000 was the show's maximum allowable claim, a fraction of what he'd collected through his scheme. Judge Judy turned to Davidson. And you, sir, have filed a countersuit for $5,000, claiming tenant negligence and violation of lease terms. She paused, studying his expensive watch and custom suit. Tell me, Mr. Davidson, how many properties do you own in Springfield? Your Honor, I manage several successful residential communities designed to provide affordable housing options. That wasn't my question. Judge Judy's interruption cracked like a whip. How many properties? Davidson shifted. 6 buildings, Your Honor. And how many total units? Approximately 124 units across all properties. Judge Judy nodded, turning a page in the file. Ms. Martinez, tell me about the day you first viewed your apartment. Adina described the showing, Davidson's promises, the rushed lease signing. As she spoke, Judge Judy examined photos of the property. The website images contrasted sharply with recent pictures showing the actual conditions. Mr. Davidson, Judge Judy held up 2 photos. Explain this discrepancy. The playground equipment in your advertising appears new and functional. The actual equipment has a condemnation notice dated months before Ms. Martinez signed her lease. Davidson launched into an explanation about pending renovations and supply chain delays. Judge Judy cut him off mid-sentence. Sir, do you take me for a fool? This isn't about supply chains. You advertised amenities you knew were condemned. Yes or no? The gallery watched Davidson squirm. The situation is more complex than that. Sir. Judge Judy's voice filled the courtroom. I've been doing this for 30 years. Nothing about your scheme is complex. It's actually quite simple. You target vulnerable families with fake promises, trap them with deceptive leases, then burden them with fraudulent fees. The complexity exists only in the web of lies you've spun to avoid responsibility. She held up Adina's lease agreement. Let's talk about these utility charges. Your advertisement prominently states, utilities included. Yet Ms. Martinez has paid hundreds in unexplained utility fees. Explain that. Davidson straightened his tie. Your Honor, the lease clearly states that management reserves the right to assess necessary utility surcharges based on usage patterns and dash. In Clause 14, subsection C, paragraph 6, printed in font so small I need a microscope to read it, Judge Judy finished. Meanwhile, utilities included appears in bold letters on every advertisement. That's called bait and switch, sir. It's illegal. The judge turned to Adina. Show me your maintenance records. Adina presented her documented requests, timestamp photos, and work orders. Judge Judy examined each one, occasionally asking for clarification. When she reached the water heater incidents, her expression darkened. Mr. Davidson, these maintenance records show you charged Ms. Martinez for repairs that were never performed. The dates don't match city inspection records. The contractor licenses listed don't exist. Did you fabricate these documents? Davidson's lawyer tried to intervene. Judge Judy shut him down. Your client forged official records. That's fraud. And based on these other tenant statements, it's a pattern. She held up affidavits from other families. 16 households reporting identical schemes. That's not coincidence, that's conspiracy. The gallery murmured as Judge Judy displayed more evidence. Photos of black mold covered up with fresh paint. Utility bills with unexplainable charges. Safety violations documented by city inspectors. Davidson's social media posts about maximizing tenant turnover, projected on the courtroom screen. Your Honor, Davidson attempted, as a professional property manager with 20 years experience. Professional? Judge Judy's eyebrows shot up. There's nothing professional about endangering families for profit. These are people's homes, sir. Children sleep in rooms you knew had exposed wiring. Elderly tenants breathe in mold you painted over. Single parents drain their savings paying fees you invented. She turned to Adina. Ms. Martinez, what finally made you take action? Adina described finding Davidson showing her occupied apartment to new tenants, planning to raise the rent and repeat his scheme. As she spoke, the bailiff distributed copies of Davidson's newer listings. Same deceptive photos, higher rents, same false promises. Enough. Judge Judy's voice cut through the tension. Mr. Davidson, in 30 years on the bench, I've seen hundreds of landlord-tenant disputes. Most involve misunderstandings, poor communication, or simple negligence. But you've orchestrated something far more sinister. You built a business model around exploiting vulnerable families. The judge leaned forward. You targeted single parents who needed housing quickly. You promised them safe homes for their children. Instead, you gave them hazardous conditions and fraudulent bills. You chose immigrants and elderly tenants, hoping they wouldn't know their rights or fight back. You counted on their desperation and fear to protect your scheme. Davidson started to speak. Judge Judy raised her hand. I'm not finished. You falsified documents. You retaliated against tenants who complained. You violated building codes, lease laws, and basic human decency. And when confronted, you hide behind paper-thin excuses and illegal contract clauses. She shuffled through more documents. The evidence Ms. Martinez gathered proves this isn't isolated. It's your standard operating procedure across all properties. Each lease designed to confuse. Each fee calculated to exploit. Each repair delayed or denied to maximize profit. Looking directly into the camera, Judge Judy continued. This case illustrates why tenant protection laws exist. Mr. Davidson represents everything wrong with predatory housing practices. He turns the dream of a safe home into a financial nightmare for families with few options. The gallery sat silent as Judge Judy delivered her verdict. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000. Additionally, I'm ordering immediate lease termination without penalty. Mr. Davidson's countersuit is dismissed with prejudice. She wasn't finished. I'm also forwarding this evidence to Springfield's district attorney and the state attorney general's office. Mr. Davidson, your actions extend beyond civil court. The relevant authorities will be very interested in these falsified documents and fraudulent billing practices. As Davidson's face reddened, Judge Judy addressed Adina directly. Ms. Martinez, you did more than win a case today. You exposed a system that preys on vulnerable families. Your courage in coming forward, in documenting everything, in fighting back. You've given other tenants a roadmap to justice. The gallery erupted in applause as Judge Judy gavelled the session closed. Adina's hands shook as she gathered her documents. Across the aisle, Davidson's confident smile had vanished, replaced by the worried look of a man who knew his scheme had finally unraveled. Outside the courtroom, Adina's phone buzzed with messages from other tenants watching the broadcast. Elena's text captured their shared victory. You did it. You really did it. Adina smiled, thinking of the 16 families who could now fight back. Judge Judy hadn't just given her justice. She'd given their whole community hope. News of Judge Judy's verdict spread through Springfield like wildfire. Within hours of the broadcast, local news vans surrounded Oak Street apartments. Adina's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she left the courtroom. Reporters wanted interviews. Tenant rights organizations sought her advice. Other Davidson Properties residents called asking how to fight their own cases. The Springfield District Attorney's Office moved with unprecedented speed. By sunset, investigators had seized records from all 6 Davidson properties. Computer forensics teams discovered years of falsified maintenance logs, doctored inspection reports, and dummy corporations designed to hide profits. The state's attorney general launched a parallel investigation into similar schemes across 3 neighboring counties. Davidson's carefully constructed empire began crumbling. City officials suspended his rental licenses pending criminal investigation. Banks froze accounts linked to his properties. Former employees came forward with stories of being forced to falsify documents and intimidate tenants. One maintenance worker revealed a folder of pre-signed inspection certificates, each waiting to be filled with fake repair dates. Adina returned home to find her neighbors gathered in the building's lobby. Mrs. Fleming brought dumplings. Elena's son hung a hand-painted "Justice Wins" banner. The Patel children ran up to hug her, their parents wiping away tears of joy. Tom Watson announced he'd already received calls from 3 other property management companies offering to take over the building's operations, legitimate companies with verifiable records and transparent policies. The television exposure created unexpected allies. A local law firm offered pro bono services to help other Davidson tenants break their leases. A housing advocacy group established an emergency fund for security deposits. Springfield City Council fast-tracked new regulations requiring landlords to provide clear fee schedules and maintenance histories to prospective tenants. Davidson's other properties told similar stories of liberation. Families shared videos of real maintenance crews arriving to address long-ignored repairs. Building inspectors conducted thorough assessments without management interference. The property's bank accounts, now under court supervision, suddenly had enough funds for all the improvements Davidson had promised but never delivered. Adina found a note slipped under her door one evening. It came from a grandmother in Davidson's Riverside property. "My granddaughter saw you on Judge Judy. She said, 'Look, Nana, that lady fought the bad man and won. Thank you for showing us we can fight back.'" The note joined dozens of others on Adina's refrigerator, each telling a story of renewed hope. Local media dubbed it the Davidson effect. Other landlords across Springfield rushed to clean up their practices. Property management companies updated their lease agreements, making fees and policies transparent. Tenants' rights became a central issue in the upcoming city council elections. Adina's case had exposed more than one corrupt landlord. It had revealed the need for systematic change in housing practices. As Adina helped Anna and Sophia pack for their move to a new apartment, one with working heat, no mold, and an actual functioning playground, she reflected on their journey. What started as one mother's fight for decent housing had sparked a movement. Davidson's scheme had counted on isolation, on each family suffering alone. Instead, 16 households united, supported by their community and validated by Judge Judy's national platform, had transformed their vulnerability into strength. 6 months after Judge Judy's verdict, Springfield's housing landscape had transformed. The City Council passed the Martinez Housing Transparency Act, requiring landlords to provide standardized fee schedules, maintenance histories, and clear lease terms to all prospective tenants. Adina sat in the front row at the signing ceremony, her daughters beside her, watching as the mayor turned their struggle into lasting change. Davidson's criminal trial revealed the full scope of his operation. Prosecutors uncovered similar schemes in 3 neighboring states, each targeting vulnerable communities with the same tactics. His testimony exposed a network of property investors who shared strategies for exploiting legal loopholes and maximizing profits through hidden fees. The evidence sparked investigations into dozens of similar operations nationwide. The former Davidson Properties buildings flourished under new management. A non-profit housing organization purchased the Oak Street complex, implementing transparent policies and genuine community involvement. The condemned playground became a symbol of renewal. Local businesses donated materials, and residents worked together to build a safe space for their children. Mrs. Fleming's grandson planted a community garden where moving trucks once photographed deceptive property listings. Adina's documentation methods became a template for tenant advocacy groups. Housing rights organizations across the country developed apps based on her systematic approach to recording violations and tracking communication. Legal aid offices created workshops teaching renters to recognize predatory practices and understand their rights. The Davidson effect entered the legal lexicon, describing cases where exposed corruption leads to systemic reform. Elena Rodriguez started a tenant mentorship program, connecting experienced renters with new immigrants and first-time tenants. The Patels transformed their experience with fraudulent maintenance records into a volunteer building inspection service, helping prospective renters evaluate properties before signing leases. Tom Watson's grandson developed a website tracking landlord compliance with the new transparency laws. Springfield's rental market statistics told the story of change. Housing code violations dropped 40% in the first year after Davidson's exposure. Emergency tenant hotline calls decreased by half. Property management companies competed on transparency and service quality rather than hidden fees and deceptive advertising. The city became a model for housing reform, hosting delegations from other municipalities studying their transformed system. The ripple effects reached beyond housing. Banks implemented stricter oversight of property management accounts to prevent fee manipulation. Insurance companies required more detailed maintenance documentation. Real estate investment groups faced increased scrutiny of their business practices. Adina's case had exposed vulnerabilities in the entire housing ecosystem, prompting reforms at every level. Local media followed up 1 year after the verdict. They found former Davidson tenants thriving in their new environments. The Flemings' grandson graduated college, his respiratory problems resolved after leaving the mold-infested apartment. Elena's son started a tenant rights club at his high school. The Patel children played safely on properly maintained equipment, their parents active in the building's resident council. Adina received letters from across the country, each sharing similar stories of housing exploitation. She spoke at tenant rights conferences, sharing her experience and encouraging others to document everything and stand together. Her manila folder of evidence had grown into a movement, empowering countless families to fight back against predatory landlords. The spring after Davidson's conviction, Adina's daughters helped plant flowers in their new building's courtyard. Sophia, now expert at spotting maintenance issues, proudly showed younger children how to report problems using the new tenant app. Anna started a kids' newsletter about their building community, featuring artwork and stories from resident families. Judge Judy's producers created a special follow-up episode highlighting the changes sparked by the case. The show featured interviews with housing advocates, reform-minded landlords, and families affected by the new transparency laws. Adina's appearance earned a standing ovation, but she made sure to share the stage with other tenant leaders who had transformed their own communities. Davidson's scheme had counted on people staying silent, accepting injustice as the cost of keeping a roof over their heads. Instead, 16 families found their voices, supported each other, and changed the system that tried to exploit them. Their story became a testament to the power of documentation, community solidarity, and the courage to fight back when the world insists you should stay quiet. On a bright Sunday morning, 2 years after Judge Judy's verdict, Adina Martinez watched her daughters playing on Oak Street Apartment's new playground. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the weekend bustle of their transformed community. The building's fresh paint didn't just cover old problems. It represented a complete renewal of trust between property managers and residents. The manila folder that once held evidence against Davidson now rested in Springfield's Housing Rights Museum, alongside photos documenting their community's transformation. Visitors studied the exhibits, learning how 16 families stood together against exploitation and won. School groups toured the museum, studying the case that rewrote housing laws and reminded everyone that justice often starts with one person refusing to stay silent. Judge Judy's words echoed through countless housing courts as other tenants challenged corrupt landlords. A home is more than walls and windows. It's a foundation for families to build their lives upon. When landlords breach that trust, they tear at the fabric of entire communities. Her ruling had given voice to millions who faced similar struggles, proving that the law, when properly enforced, could protect society's most vulnerable members. Davidson's scheme had targeted those he thought wouldn't fight back. Single parents stretching their budgets, elderly residents on fixed incomes, immigrants building new lives. He never expected them to unite, to document everything, to stand firm until justice prevailed. His greatest mistake was underestimating the strength of a community defending their right to safe, honest housing. Adina's daughters grew up understanding that courage often meant speaking up when others stayed quiet. Sophia's school essay about the case won a citizenship award. Anna's artwork depicting their community's victory hung in City Hall. They learned that change started with one person's refusal to accept injustice, but succeeded through the united strength of neighbors supporting each other. The story of Oak Street Apartments reminded everyone that decent housing wasn't a luxury. It was a right worth fighting for. In courtrooms and city councils across America, people pointed to Judge Judy's verdict as proof that justice could prevail over greed, that community could triumph over corruption, and that every family deserved a safe place to call home.